BC Children's Hospital Dream Lottery. Win this fabulous South Surrey home or $2.3 million tax-free cash. Tickets, bcchildren.com. Matt Sekeres from Sekeres and Price. Full disclosure, dear listener, we had our full podcast recorded and published here on Friday, September 2nd, heading into the Labor Day long weekend. And then the Vancouver Canucks went ahead and re-signed JT Miller, 7 years, $56 million, an average of $8 million per. We did a live Twitter Spaces live on Friday afternoon. I was joined by Jeff Patterson, Blake Price, Farhan Lalji. So we wanted you all to be able to listen to that. So here's that portion. Breaking news from the Vancouver Canucks and a special emergency segment, if not entire pod, from S&P here. Sekeres and Price S&P presents JT Miller has re-signed with the Vancouver Canucks. It is a big, big deal for the new Vancouver, or for the current Vancouver Canuck in his new contract. He gets 7 years, $56 million. It works out to $8 million per year. It's Matt Sekeres alongside Jeff Patterson, who's in for Blake Price this week. Jeff, you picked a hell of a time to sit in for Blake. And how about this, the Friday of a long weekend? Jeff, do I have you now?
You do. And I thought I was done with you for the long weekend, but here we are reconvening. So, I was just mentioning that Patrick Allvin doesn't seem to observe North American holidays the way we do. He got the best deal done on July 1st, as you'll recall. And here leading into Labor Day, he does get some work done. Boy, does he ever. And I joked on Twitter earlier, Matt, that quite the distraction ploy by JT Miller posting pics of his newborn baby son earlier today, thinking that he'd be a doting dad for the weekend at the very least. But diapers are expensive, I guess. So JT Miller makes his decision and gets his deal done.
So, Jeff, we had heard all summer long that both sides were very far apart here, that JT Miller wanted to negotiate the big payday coming off his career year of 99 points, that the Vancouver Canucks have drawn a line in the sand and weren't willing to go to the places that JT Miller and his representative wanted to go contractually. In terms of theories as to why it is they were able to bridge this gap, why it is the Vancouver Canucks on September 2nd, going into Labor Day weekend, agree on a 7-year, $56 million deal at $8 million per. What are your thoughts on how it was they were able to get together on this? Because it comes a little bit out of the blue as a lightning bolt from left field based on all the reporting throughout the summer from numerous sources.
Yeah, and I think there was a little bit of movement on all parts here. I think the Canucks, if they had been exploring trade options, as we were led to believe through the draft and free agency and into the offseason, clearly the trade market wasn't as robust as they thought. So maybe they didn't like the returns that they were still being offered. We know that the Miller camp had floated this notion of shutting down negotiations ahead of the season. Well, we're into September now, and maybe the Canucks were getting a little bit in the way of cold feet if, it was kind of a now or never proposition, even though there's 3 weeks before the start of training camp. I do wonder if the Canucks realized that they ran the risk of a low return as a rental at the trade deadline when a player like Patrick Kane, among others, could potentially be out there on the market as well. And JT Miller and his camp probably read the room and saw what happened to a guy like Johnny Hockey, who, he gets paid, but he's going to get paid in Columbus, and it's not always the way that the market unfolds the way you think it's going to when you get to unrestricted free agency. And so there was this devil you know versus the devil you don't. JT has always been clear about how much he loves the city of Vancouver and playing in Vancouver. And I guess this can put to bed, too, this notion that Americans won't re-sign in Canada, because this is, it's a pretty big commitment for a guy that was born in the Pittsburgh area, Eastern Ohio, makes his summer home back there. And this is a commitment to the Vancouver Canucks, the city of Vancouver, life on this side of the border. And clearly JT didn't have any reservations about that. And so, it provides clarity now for a guy like Miller, who probably didn't have the appetite to deal with the question on a daily basis as he showed up here to get set for training camp and then ultimately, this final year of his current contract. So all parties come together, they get a deal done. And, there's still lots of questions about what it means for Bo Horvat, what it's going to mean down the road for Elias Pettersson, and ultimately for the Vancouver Canucks, this idea of a competitive window, because I look at it and I see Thatcher Demko signed at a remarkably team-friendly deal for 4 more years, provided Vezina caliber goaltending, or at least on the radar, got some Vezina votes, and they've got him locked up for 4 more years at $5 million per. I don't love 7 years. The Canucks didn't have to go that 8th year as they could have with JT Miller, but I do think the kind of player he is, he's been durable, he's been healthy. I'd like to think that there are 4 good years, 4 elite level years possibly for JT Miller that line up with the 4 years left for Thatcher Demko, 2 more years for Elias Pettersson. It just kind of feels like, the race and the chase is on again to get competitive here quickly. We went through a dark decade where they could never truly get competitive. Still so many questions about the back end and reshaping that defense core. But I kind of look at this as a 4-year window now. They're in the starting blocks, and they better be ready to race.
Yeah, so he'll be 37, 38 years old when this deal expires, Jeff, because, of course, he still has the 1 year at $5.25 million. We're asking on our Bodog poll question today. You can vote at Sekeres Price. Is the JT Miller deal a good one? A good deal for the Vancouver Canucks? Give me your yes or no. And we got our buddy Rob, the hockey guy, Rob Williams from the Daily Hive, who has stopped by our Twitter Spaces here and is going to join in a second. But first to you, Jeff, is it a good deal for the Canucks?
When you retain your best player, yes. I mean, I don't like the length of term, and I see the red flags on the back end, but this guy is heart and soul. I mean, you take the temperature of the hockey team off JT Miller. There are a lot of people that do believe that he's the true leader, even if he's not the captain. And he came off a 99-point season, and they have retained that player. On that level, yes, it's a good news day for the organization. But, and it comes with a but, and that's just life and doing business. I all along felt that the best move for this group was to move him at the deadline and realize assets that could grow with the younger players, and that maybe it would still be a couple of years before they were Stanley Cup contenders. I still feel that way. Like, they're committing to JT Miller at 29 and they didn't make the playoffs, and there's no guarantee they make the playoffs here in the final year of this current deal. And that's the concern, that, you're committing this kind of money and that kind of term to a player who, as good as he is, still hasn't been able to truly move the meter and the needle to get you over the hump here. And there are still things that are clogging the progress of this organization. And I mentioned the defense core. The salary cap's going up. So $8 million a year doesn't really scare me for if he's your best player and he's your best player for a few more years here. I could pallet $8 million. Like, that's not the issue, especially with a rising salary cap. It's more about, making this kind of move and commitment when you're still not a Stanley Cup contender. And I just think that they would have been better off if they had been able to realize sort of that 3-piece deal that included a first-round pick somewhere. But if it wasn't there, if it wasn't made available to them, and only they know truly what the offers are, then I guess they feel that this is the right course of action for the hockey club. But I want to see this team win. I want to cover a good hockey club. I want nothing more than to be there on a nightly basis when they're in the playoffs. But even with JT Miller having 99 points last year, they still fell short of even that stated goal, let alone winning rounds and being truly competitive.
Look, 3 things, Jeff, that I think may well have driven this. And you've touched on a couple of them, and let me add one more. Number one, as you say, that the deals that were out there, even after free agency into this summer, were not to their liking, and they just didn't have the stomach to play this out during the season, with the potential for injury, with the potential for underperformance, and what that would have done with the return. I mean, we talked about how both sides had a little bit of mutual assured destruction here, that, JT Miller wants to barter off the 99-point season, that he doesn't want to get hurt or have a step back and have to deal with that in contract negotiations, and that the Vancouver, and not to mention all the distractions and the questions that you noticed. And of course, the Vancouver Canucks had some of the similar concerns about injury and underperformance. You do have to wonder whether the Nazem Kadri extension, the 7x7, and then, of course, some of the younger centermen who have signed, particularly the Tage Thompson contract more recently with Buffalo, if that influenced this either way, whether or not the Miller camp moved at all or the Vancouver Canucks moved towards JT Miller. And then there's always the looming specter of the owner, right? And he does tend to get close to players, and he does tend to form emotional bonds with certain players or teams? And did the owner have any say in this and say to his hockey people, let's get this done before the rest of our team hits town, before the rest of our team hits training camp, and it becomes the huge story in Vancouver and across Canuck Nation?
Yeah, and I see our buddy Rick Dollywell talking to the agent, Brian Bartlett, who says that Miller could have got more on the open market, that he left money on the table here, but he made the decision because he wants to stay in Vancouver, spend his career here, and win Stanley Cups. And I have no doubt that JT Miller burns to be a success. I mean, he got traded away from Tampa. He's watched his former teammates and his buddies win a couple of Stanley Cups. He wants in on some of that action. But again, it's this realistic notion of where are the Canucks? How close are they truly? And, when we go back to the bubble of 2020, JT Miller was a terrific performer. He was a point-a-game guy in his one and only appearance as a playoff performer for the Vancouver Canucks. I have no doubt that he would lead the charge here if the Canucks can qualify for the postseason. But, I look at JT Miller, and I do look at the way he arrived at 99 points last year. Matt, only Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl had more power play points than JT Miller in the National Hockey League. I don't know that that's repeatable. I think that that's one of those things that from year to year, it's going to change. It's going to fluctuate. I have no doubt that the Canucks are going to have a good power play and that Miller will be a big part of it. But what if EP40 has the puck run through him a little bit more and takes away, a handful, even 10 assists on the power play? All of a sudden, Miller's points are likely to drop. But, I don't think there are a lot of people that think that he's going to repeat 99 points. But if he can be a point-a-game guy and play and lead the charge in all situations, he's still going to be one of, if not the best, Vancouver Canucks this coming season at the very least. And I mentioned Elias Pettersson, and I wonder too, and maybe this is a little cynical, but this is life in and around pro sports, is committing to JT Miller in some way some insurance that at least you're going to have one of your leading scorers if in 2 years Elias Pettersson either prices himself out of the Canucks range or takes ownership of his career the way a player like Matthew Tkachuk did and decides that, if the Canucks slip and have 2 more years where they're not where people want them to be, is it some protection at the very least that you're going to have JT Miller here for the long term?
You mentioned the Bo trade. You mentioned Elias Pettersson. Those are 2 offshoots here that you have to wonder about. What is Elias Pettersson thinking here? He bargained and negotiated, albeit as a restricted free agent, not a year away from unrestricted free agency, and got the bridge deal. JT Miller gets the extension before Bo Horvat gets the extension, as you mentioned. And then, Jeff, what you were talking about from the jump with this player, going back to last December, when the trade rumors first started, how are you going to fix defense, particularly the right side of defense, if JT Miller isn't one of the pieces put in play? What are your thoughts and impressions on how they can go about fixing the right side defense? Because they didn't fix it in free agency. They didn't fix it in the draft. Here we are with 2 signposts that have come and gone in the summer where they don't fix defense and the right side, and now their biggest trade chip gets re-signed and they don't fix defense and the right side.
It's funny. Before I came on here on the Twitter Spaces with you, I was going back and forth with a member of Canucks Twitter and a follower, and he makes the point that Jim Rutherford has won Stanley Cups with less than optimal defense cores, and you just wonder if that's the view that Jim Rutherford has, that with the, you can have some success, and maybe it's a flawed strategy. He's got Stanley Cup rings to show for it, but in the right situations, you have a stud goaltender and you have legitimate superstars up front that you can get by with a mediocre defense. Now, Quinn Hughes is anything but mediocre, and he's going to continue to get better. And the hope is that they're going to chip away and surround him with better players. But they're essentially returning the same defense core as last year, and we know that it wasn't good enough. So that seems like a risky proposition at the very least. And I think it bears noting that when I talk about having superstars up front, in Pittsburgh at least, maybe not so much Carolina, but in Pittsburgh, Jim Rutherford had 2 of the biggest stars in the game, and the Vancouver Canucks don't have guys on that level at this stage just yet. But you do wonder if Jim Rutherford believes that, you load up front, you have elite level goaltending that maybe somehow that you can squeeze by. But, we just came through a management regime that believed in just getting to the playoffs and anything can happen. It feels like a flawed strategy. So they need to work on the defense core. I guess the hope is that the cap is going up and that's going to provide some flexibility. But since day one, this management regime talked about its stated goal being to create this cap cushion. Well, they've done anything but. They have spent money. They spent money on Besser. They landed Kuzmenko, who's not expensive this year, but will be in years to come if they're able to retain him. And now today, they break the bank on JT Miller. So, talk is cheap. And at some point, I want to believe that they're going to be able to carve out some of this cap flexibility, but it hasn't happened. They haven't been able to move money. And you wonder if, like, the Miller deal doesn't kick in for a year. So it doesn't impact the cap in the here and now, but they still have to be cap compliant. They're going to have to shed some salary, and they just have not shown an ability to do that yet.
Well, here he is from his vacation, Blake Price, joining us here with this special S&P Presents emergency segment here on a JT Miller re-signing. Blake, thanks for joining. What are your impressions of this deal?
Well, it's surprising, first and foremost. I did not expect this to come about. I think it's a reasonable price. I really do. Like, it's not that the price alone is the problem. It's a lot of term, obviously, and takes this player deep into his 30s. So that's going to be the concern. There's going to be corresponding cascading moves, as Jeff has alluded to here since he came on. I mean, this is going to cause other things to happen, and the question is, are Canucks fans going to be okay with those cascading moves? And it means they're going to have to rob from other positions, you'd think.
What's the cascading move, Blake? What do you think? Like, what do you think gives here? Do you think it means Bo plays it out here and we see, and maybe he's the trade chip? Does it mean that Elias Pettersson becomes available on the trade market down the way? What would you immediately see as a potential cascading move on this?
Well, at the very least, you could envision a Tyler Myers move either next offseason or next trade deadline, but then the goals will be different. The goals will not be to bring in a playing asset at that point. You'll just be liquidating cap space and then relying on whatever you have defensively to fill that gap, right? So it's that in and of itself may sound great at the right now for Canucks fans, but you're assuming that Jack Rathbone pans out. You're assuming a bunch of things, that Oliver Ekman-Larsson remains a viable defenseman and that sort of thing. I mean, just deleting Oliver Ekman-Larsson and or Tyler Myers, but getting nothing in return and just relying on the club depth right now on defense, that does not make you a better team. And I think everybody wants this team to be moving forward and getting better year after year. And that's going to be hard now with this money there. Again, no one's upset at the player. It was always just about how you make the contract work. And now you're going to have to bend to this JT Miller contract. So we'll see. Maybe they've got a plan in place that they are 99% sure is going to come to fruition, but there is still an element of risk here, no matter how confident they are.
Jeff, pick up on that.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked for a while about a guy like Tyler Myers. I mean, if you could move that contract with the 2 years left, right there, you are clearing out a bunch of space, but somebody's got to play right defense. And whether you like the player or not, right now, he's one of their top 4 defensemen. So we've seen way too much of it for my liking, but it's the reality here in the offseason of, teams essentially giving players away with no return because that's where they are in terms of their cap flexibility. So I don't see the Canucks giving Tyler Myers away. And we've talked about, too, that, this time next year, there's almost nothing left on his contract and it's more palatable in terms of a deal, but you do have to replace him. And you just wish there was something in the system. You wish that they had drafted some right shot defensemen somewhere along the line, but they haven't. And so they're going to have to go out and find, and we know that there's a premium paid for right shot defensemen. Well, again, I come back to where, I mean, they just don't have the financial wherewithal right now. They're up against it. And yes, the cap's going up in 2 years' time, but you can't waste 2 more years of Thatcher Demko and Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson, and JT Miller's not re-signing here to spin his wheels for 2 more years so that you can find some flexibility. So they're going all in. It's just that they're going all in. They're not in the pole position. They are starting well back in the pack here, and they're diving back into this, and kind of feel like we've seen this movie before. Now, I do believe that this is a better set of forwards, and Quinn Hughes, as he develops and gets better, he gives them an element that they just haven't had really in the organization's history. So there's lots of nice pieces here. And we did see these guys. I mentioned Miller in his first attempt at playoff hockey as a member of the Vancouver Canucks. Pettersson showed well. Hughes showed well. Demko obviously does well. Like, that's the hunger to get back to the postseason to see what these guys can do, because in their first go round, they all look pretty good. And you want to believe that they will, take their learnings from that and apply them and be that much better. But you got to get there first. And that's been their downfall since the bubble. And, as I see it right now, it's a bit of a coin toss. I kind of need to see how lineup shakedown before opening night to truly gauge what's going on around them. But, I do think there's better talent elsewhere in the Pacific Division to lock up the top three spots. So, if I look at the Canucks and their playoff chances right now, I kind of feel like they're going to be in that wild card chase where they've been in the past. Maybe they get it right. Maybe they get above the bar this time. But still, we're talking about squeaking into the playoffs. We are not talking about getting in the playoffs as a team to beat and a team to watch and one that's going to have high expectations. So still a lot of ground to cover. And that's where I'm at a bit of a loss that an organization in their position right here, right now, feels that committing this much money and this much term to that player, how much further ahead does that ultimately get them?
I want to thank everybody who's listening on Twitter Spaces. Appreciate your time here late afternoon on a Friday going into the long weekend. Have we discussed the trade protection here? Forgive me, Jeff. There's a no-trade clause for the first 4 years, according to Rick Dollywall. There's a modified no-trade for the last 3 years, so there's some flexibility with regards to player movement. Does that change anyone's opinion, or does that edify and inform anyone's opinion on this deal?
No, I mean, I guess I think that's a win for both sides, that I'm not surprised that Miller demanded some, fairly stable trade protection to commit here in the early going. But at the same time, we see that around the league on the back end. You want to believe that these deals can be moved, but a lot of times it's easier said than done. I haven't seen the full structure of the deal to see if there are signing bonuses and the way that it's laid out, and if it's more money up front, less of the back end, those types of things. Again, that can make a contract a little more tradable too. So I'll wait to see all of the fine print when it comes down here, but not surprised that he was able to command some degree of stability for, again, adding to his family today and committing to the city. He wants to know that he's not committing here and it's going to be dealt a year from now.
A lot of these deals now start with the trade protection or the no move protection, and then work their way backwards from there. Hey, Blake. No, we got you back now. I think you were just on mute for a second, my man. Go ahead.
All right. I've got a very weak signal clearly, but we are...
we got you, Blake. Go ahead.
We're still going here, alive and ticking here on Twitter Spaces, and breaking down the JT Miller signing for the Vancouver Canucks, and still trying to piece together what the future looks like for this team as they try to push forward and improve while retaining assets all the same. And it's pretty clear that the market disappeared for JT Miller as they saw it. And I was actually doing a hit on Regina radio earlier, and I wondered at that time, can the Vancouver Canucks get that Rangers trade back on the table? Would they take it? Hedl, Lundqvist, and a first-round pick, and I don't think they ever got it back on the table. But do you think they would have if that was on the table? Do you think they would have pulled the trigger on that now?
Blake, thanks for joining us. You're right about your connection there. We'll let you get back on your holiday. Appreciate you making time here late on a Friday afternoon, heading into the long weekend. More on Tuesday.
My pleasure. It was fun checking in, and
Did we pull you off the surfboard? Were you on a surfboard when all this?
I literally just got in. And I just passed a dude on the beach. He's like, "Hey, great to hear you guys back up and going." I'm like, "Yeah." And I walk in and I see this headline. I'm like, "Oh my God, what the hell just happened?"
And you're literally, I'm going to have to get back up and going here. So thanks for that, Blake. We'll let you get back to the family and to the surf there. Let's get to some of the comments that we're seeing here from our listeners with regards to this deal. And look, I understand that there are some people who are going to be over the moon here. JT Miller's back. They love JT Miller. And Here's Peter on Twitter. At least I feel like this management group has a plan. They still have an idea of how to make this team a contender. It's not betting where they just do big deals for a bottom-end player and just hope for the best. There is a plan, and JT is a part of it. Jeff, certainly the plan has changed because immediately the plan was to trade JT Miller if he did not re-sign by the trade deadline. They decided to hold on to him, give their team its best opportunity to make the trade deadline, to make the playoffs after the trade deadline. That went pop, and then they thought they'd trade him in the summer and by the draft, and all of a sudden that wasn't there either. So the plan has revised. Do you still think you can say this is a management group with a plan, or do you think they're now playing it a little fancy-free?
Oh, I don't get the sense that this group plays anything fancy-free. I give them credit. I mean, and I think we've seen this from Patrick Allvin. Certainly, Jim Rutherford seems to, be willing to talk to just about anybody that wants to talk to him. Patrick Allvin is on the down low. I mean, he's a hard guy to get to. Certainly keeps his cards close to his vest, and to be able to spring this kind of deal. And I know that all the hockey insiders, the big ones, final weekend at the cabin and those types of things. So maybe not everybody's poking around, but this came out of the blue. I mean, it surprised all of us. And that's hard to do in today's National Hockey League and in the social media environment that we're in. So, that seems to be the way that Patrick Allvin operates, calculated, fairly quietly, fairly shrewd, I think. So I don't think that they're coming at this haphazardly or just kind of throwing things and hoping they stick. But when we're talking about the big money of today's NHL, and Blake said, there is a cascading effect. Bo Horvat is very much caught in the cascading effect here. Can they keep both of these guys? Can they do long-term big money deals with both of these players moving forward, knowing that that's up against the backdrop of 2 more years of Elias Pettersson? And, a guy like Vasily Podkolzin is going to come out of his entry-level deal. If he progresses like he did in the second half, he's going to, we see it, second-year deals or second contracts. Guys are able to command money. So, the cap is going up, and that's going to help everybody that operates in this environment. But again, there is still a salary cap. There's not enough for everybody, not enough to go around. And so what does it mean for Bo Horvat? Where does Bo Horvat factor into all this? Bruce Boudreau has talked already this week about the big 3 down the middle. Well, he's got Miller signed, and we know what he thinks of JT Miller and how much he likes him and how much he uses him. Elias Pettersson, if he plays like he did in the second half, the coach is going to love him as well. But, what does it mean ultimately for Bo Horvat? And where JT Miller looked like a trade chip, is Bo Horvat now in play? Is Bo Horvat possibly somebody that and it's hard, he's a captain? I'm not trying to stir this up.
I know.
This is the reality of the situation. There's not enough to go around. So what does it mean for Bo Horvat, who sounded like he had an extension at the draft, and now this week we're hearing 2 sides are further apart than maybe we were led to believe?
And that seems to be the prevailing comment we're getting here. Rick and Burnaby, maybe the plan is to trade Bo, ? Captain Kangaroo on tour. I was expecting 5 by 9.5. I'll take 7 by 8, but now we need a right D with 0 cap. Is Horvat gone? Miles asks, Bo outgoing. Someone who's listening in is our friend Farhan Lalji of TSN, longtime Vancouver correspondent. Happy long weekend to you, Farhan. You're working too, buddy. What do you make of this JT Miller extension? And answer me the Bodog poll question. Is it a good deal for the Canucks?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good deal. I just don't think this team is close enough to contention to be making these types of deals. And when you look at the younger players that JP just talked about, just the contracts that are due, right? Like the check is going to come due with Elias Pettersson, with Bo Horvat, with Vasily Podkolzin, and all of these guys. Fortunately, the last regime was at least able to get Quinn Hughes on a 6-year deal as opposed to the desperation bridge they went with Pettersson, So, I mean, look, are they going to be better this year with JT Miller in the lineup? Sure they are, right? I mean, he was their best player last year, or at least their best forward last year. So it's going to placate the owner. It's going to make some people happy today in terms of what it's going to look like this fall, because they weren't able to make the defensive improvements they made. But, I'll echo what the other guys say. You've got to take a big picture approach. And when you make deals like this, you should be closer than the Canucks are right now.
Farhan, what do you think the trickle down is here, and who do you think it most affects? Is that Bo Horvat? Is that Elias Pettersson? Hey, we haven't mentioned Besser or someone else right now. Who do you think has to go because of this? Because we know cap space and money is tight with the Vancouver Canucks. Not just this coming year where Miller's on the old deal, but particularly in the past or in the future where they already have tens of millions committed.
Yeah, I mean, Horvat also on the old deal for the coming year, and he's going to have to deal with it next year. So that's the one I worry about, right? And when you look at what he did in terms of his goal scoring a year ago and just kind of where he sits within the organization as far as the captaincy is concerned, and, I don't know, does this mean that all of a sudden they're looking ahead to you could say JT Miller could be a captain down the road, but at the end of the day, I mean, he's also an older player, right? Do you eventually look down and say, oh, well, we think Pettersson could be that guy and carry that? Understand that a year ago, this team tried to put a lot of responsibility on younger players that weren't ready for it. And as a result, the coach got fired, right? And, so now what are you going to do here, right? Like are you going to accelerate that part of it on the leadership side as well? So I just don't know how both Pettersson and Horvat are going to be here with Miller on this contract. I'm struggling to wrap my head around that one.
It's a little bit impulsive. As we know, they were far apart at different times during the summer. So this is quite a lightning bolt out of left field. Sam wonders if this is a hockey operations decision or if this is an ownership decision, Farhan, that he just couldn't bear not having JT Miller, a popular player, back this year. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really fair question. And I'm not going to say that ownership demanded it, but I certainly wouldn't be shocked if ownership suggested it and encouraged it, because it's not about popular player. It's about today. It's about playoff revenue today, as opposed to taking the big picture view that they may have taken a decade ago at different times, right? So, yeah, I certainly think the owner was very much on board with a move in this direction to get them that much closer. I mean, they despite what's happened in Calgary and Edmonton, I mean, you can certainly make a case for this Canuck roster being able to get into the playoffs next year if they even come close to the form they showed in the second half of last season. But again, I think we all objectively can look at this and see the teams that actually contended, not just Colorado, but the others that contended, and realize the Canucks aren't of that ilk, even with JT Miller. So, is there a secondary move here that, we've talked about? Blake talked about that as well, a cascading effect, not just in terms of in terms of Horvat and Pettersson, but the other side could be, okay, can you move a Connor Garland for a reasonable defenseman? Or, can you move a Brock Besser for a reasonable defenseman? And I'm not encouraging those moves, but if that becomes the trickle-down effect, then maybe we view this whole thing a little bit differently. We always talk about asset management. People don't give enough credit to opportunity cost, right? So there's a very short-term view that, if you can't just let Miller walk, but you could do a lot with that money you otherwise would have paid him, right? So you guys talked about how the management group maybe didn't have the stomach to go through that all season long and have to answer those questions and the risk of potentially losing him at the deadline for minimal gain or seeing him walk at the end of the year, right? That's one way to look at it. But for me, it's like, okay, well, we're not going to pay him, what are we doing with that money? And you look at Calgary, they didn't pay Johnny Gaudreau. Ultimately, he walked away, but they did some pretty good things with that money eventually, right? So there are multi-layered ways of looking at those types of situations. So, beyond the guys they just can't sign, let's see if they move one of these forwards to get that defenseman.
Farhan, do you think the Nazem Kadri extension, the 7x7 extension, or even some of those young centermen, Tage Thompson and Robert Thomas and their extension, do you think that would have influenced this deal? Are we giving the credit? Are we not giving them enough credit where they look at it and go, wow, he may be a whole lot more expensive to re-sign in season, particularly if he's very good. Let's get on this now where it's just $8 million as opposed to what he might be able to command. Any chance of that here, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think the Kadri deal played into this a little bit. And quite frankly, I think Kadri's a player of more value, right? Just because of his age. I'm not telling you he's a better player. I just think he's a better bet. And, he got 7x7. So does that mean you look at JT Miller and think that that's a little high? It's hard to say, but for me, I definitely think that deal and how it not just in terms of the numbers of the deal, but how that influenced the trade market as well. I think it absolutely had an impact. Impossible not to.
Yeah, and well, Jeff, pick up on that, and then we'll talk a little bit more on the trade market front. Jeff, any chance they wanted to get on this, that they absolutely had to add him and worried that he might even be more expensive as the season went along?
Sure. I mean, that's the gamble. There's a risk on both sides. The risk for Miller was that he gets hurt or that he's not as productive, but the risk for the hockey club is that, with a healthy Elias Pettersson and a power play that I do think has the potential to be top 5 in the National Hockey League, if Miller comes back and gets off to an incredible start, the meter's running at that point. And so, yeah, I think absolutely from a hockey club standpoint, if you can lock again, $8 million for a 99-point top scorer, best player, I think he's going to have trouble getting back to 99 points, but a red hot power play certainly would be a path to that. I have no issues with it. It's just like everything else. I mean, we talk about OEL and how long that, like this contract goes through the 2029-30 season. Like when I saw that in print, I may be done covering the Canucks by then. Who knows? Like
my 10-year-old daughter's going to
No,
graduate
Jeff.
at that point.
You're not allowed to retire, Jeff, before we say so. Okay, we can't lose you on the Vancouver Canucks beat. You're too important, too critical. Just want to say, for late Friday afternoon heading into a long weekend, thank you so much to everybody who is listening. Shout out to everybody in the Ferry lineup right now. We know you've got a weight on your hands here on the long weekend. You can tweet at us at Sekeres and Price, text 778-402-9680 to the Great Clips inbox. Great Clips. It's going to be great. Answer the poll question, the Bodog poll question on Sekeres and Price, at Sekeres and Price on Twitter. Is this a good deal for the Vancouver Canucks? And a special shout out to one of our friends and sponsors, Jason Hominick of Jason.Mortgage. He has saved Sekeres and Price listeners millions of dollars. If you're looking for a mortgage, want to renew, get in touch with Jason at Jason.Mortgage. Guys, do we think they missed the best trade available, whether it was that Rangers deal with Lundqvist, Heedle, and a first-round pick at the deadline? Got nothing close to that deal trade-wise, and that's one of the things that prompted this. Farhan?
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I get why they didn't take that deal at that point. And, you certainly think that there's still a lot of value in this player in the offseason. But man, oh man, I don't think they could have predicted how the market was going to change. Whether he's a winger or a center, I think it was a lost opportunity. But I get why they didn't do it at the time. It's easy to play revisionist history, but the fact that they couldn't come close to that deal, and to go back to Jeff's point that, yeah, the meter could keep ticking if he has a great season. If you view that $8 million is too much for the player, isn't a great start by the player a good thing in terms of his trade value, potentially just whetting the appetite of other teams and resetting things going into next season? Like that part, I'm trying to wrap my head around why it would scare them. Yep. If you think $8 million a year was too much to begin with, which I guess they didn't, or desperately eventually decided to pull the trigger on it, they weren't comfortable with that number a few weeks ago. So if that was your thought, like the fact that that could only go up shouldn't affect you. It should excite you in terms of what you could potentially get in a trade, because as you said, that was the best offer and they never came close to it again.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I just, again, I think that basically if they were going to trade him at the deadline, at that point, he's a true rental, and maybe there are other teams that would look at making that deal for a playoff run, but those aren't teams that were looking to commit to him over the long haul. I just think that it can get messy around the trade deadline. I think it can get murky. It can get crowded with other players and the right fit for potential teams. And I keep coming back to a guy like Patrick Kane. I have trouble believing that he's going to play it out in Chicago, and maybe he would be preferable for some teams, different style player, obviously. But no, I mean, I do think that there is a risk. Now, I hear what you're saying, Farhan, and if JT Miller comes back and performs the way that he did last year, that's a win for the Canucks, because it probably means he's helping them get above the playoff bar and all those types of things. But the risk is that his price keeps going up, and if they felt that they could stomach $8 million and they could pounce on that, I mean, it does sound like, according to the comments from the agent, that this was the team that kind of circled back here and made some moves that made this happen ultimately. So they've got their deal done. And as we talked about, what's next, I guess. And just to back to Horvat for a sec, guys, because, yeah, we talk about, is there enough room? You're not signing JT Miller if you don't think that you're going all in. And so this idea now of moving off Bo Horvat, like we've just spent the last little while talking about Bruce Boudreau, and he's three deep down the middle, and that gives them the best chance. And this is a coach that believes in these three centers, and maybe they've got better depth up the middle than a lot of teams. And now all of a sudden they're saying, well, can they afford Bo Horvat? If you had Jason Dickinson waiting in the wings who could play the matchup role as a centerman and take on some of those third line responsibilities, Dickinson's never scored in double digits in terms of goals in the NHL, and Horvat's coming off a career best 31, and that was him getting injured late in the season. He could have pushed 35. So Jason Dickinson is not a replacement for Bo Horvat. I'm not trying to suggest that he is, but it comes back to as well to depth in the organization. And if they had somebody down in Abbotsford that was knocking on the door, waiting in the wings to be able to slide up and get a spot in the National Hockey League, but we know that this farm system and the development pipeline is so bereft of quality players. And I know that this new regime has sunk money in already, and this is something to watch. But in the here and now, like the idea of moving off Bo Horvat seems preposterous because it flies in the face of what they did today in beefing up with JT Miller and looking like a team that thinks it's prepared to take some sort of run here in the next couple of years.
It's funny, guys, because we have more than 500 votes now in on our Bodog poll question. Is the JT Miller extension a good deal for the Canucks? And that's at Sekeres and Price. 43% are voting no. That's a pretty high number for the knee-jerk fan reaction on a popular player. As you say, Jeff, 99 points. You got to wonder whether that's a career high. Want to shout out Jay on Twitter at jhammer_87, who says to me, guys, he's 5th in the league in secondary assists. He's not getting to 99 points again. We should also note that his shooting percentage last year at 15.5, a little better than his career average of 14.4. So, there's the possibility that the assists, and particularly those second assists that floated 99 points, come back to the pack a little bit, and there's certainly a chance that some of those goals come back to the pack as well at 32. Let me ask you this. Farhan, we'll start with you, and then Jeff after that. How many good years do they need out of JT Miller to make this contract worthwhile? Is that 3? Is that 4? Is that 5? What says you?
Yeah, I think 4 or 5. It's got to be closer to the high end. You look at the Oliver Ekman-Larsson deal and what we're going to use to potentially gauge that as a good deal that we know isn't going to age well, and it's kind of the same number, right? When he came in with 7 years left on that deal. So yeah, like we can't see that level of atrophy. 99 to 80, right? I'm getting that on feedback on Twitter as well, that, he could easily drop down to an 80-point season, which is still a point a game, which for most players is good. But relative to 99, there would be a lot of panic if he dropped to 80 points with that kind of salary that's due to him next season. So, I think 4 or 5, because the last 2 years are going to be really, really ugly.
Jeff?
Just look at John Tavares, right, and see what that's looking like. And, the overall numbers are declining. They're not awful yet, but right now that contract in Toronto is already being viewed as an anchor.
That's not the worst comparison. Jeff?
Yeah, I come back to 4 just to line up with Demko, because I really think 4 years of Thatcher Demko at $5 million, if he continues to progress, then he's going to be asking for the world and probably will be owed it. And I know the cap is supposed to go up by then, but I just look at those 4 years. They've got Thatcher Demko locked down. He's going to provide them quality, surplus value in the most important position in hockey. So I would say if they get 4 really good years out of JT Miller, then it syncs up with Demko. And, you'd like to think that there's enough time there for this group to continue to reshape the defense. And look, do I think JT Miller gets to 99? Probably not. Even if it dropped to 80, as Farhan said, if Elias Pettersson plays the whole season like he did the second half, Elias Pettersson should get up over 80. Could you live with 2 guys at 82 points, a point a game per? It's a drop for Miller, but it's a bump for Pettersson, pretty much a wash in that regard. And then, I do think that Brock Besser, with all the personal tragedies and the issues, and hopefully healthy all season, like it feels like it's go time for him. Kuzmenko's a wild card, but he should be able to add some offense. Mikheyev, paying him $5 million, you want to get him close to 20 at the very least. I think Garland stands to bump a little bit. Like there are reasons to believe that this team is going to be better offensively. And you know what you're getting at Thatcher Demko. There's questions about Spencer Martin over the longer haul as a legitimate backup as opposed to the spot duty there. But, there's reason to believe that this team can be better. But what does better mean? And ultimately, is better enough to, challenge in the division, to challenge in the conference? Feels like with this defense core that there's still a few steps down the ladder from being in that conversation.
Before we let Farhan go, and my friend, thank you so much for stopping by here on a Friday, going into the long weekend. Outside of Chris Letang, we talked about how Jim Rutherford won 2 Stanley Cups with 2 of the worst defense cores according to the critics, according to the evaluators that have ever won Stanley Cups. Can somebody name me a Pittsburgh Penguin defenseman or the number 2 Pittsburgh Penguin defenseman after Chris Letang in those Cup years?
You'll have to give it to me. Don't tell me it's Eric Goodbranson because I know he wasn't there yet.
Jeff, you want to take a crack?
Well, Ron Hainsey was involved in one of them.
Ron Hainsey,
Trevor
the
Daley.
second year of the back-to-back, and then the others were Trevor Daley, Ole Mata, Brian Dumoulin, Ian Cole, Ben Lovejoy, and Justin Schultz. So, if you win back-to-back cups with that defense core and Chris Letang, maybe you look at it and say, hey, Quinn Hughes in a cast of 5, and that'll be good enough if we score enough goals, as you were saying earlier.
Yeah, I'm struggling with it. I'm struggling with it just because, as we saw last year, because even going into last season when they added Dickinson and Garland, the thought was, hey, the Canucks top 9 could be a pretty dynamic group, and this group should be better than that group. But what did we find? We found they couldn't get the puck to them, right? Like someone's got to get the puck to these guys. It's not just about offense from your defense. It's put these guys in position with speed, with room to go make plays and do what they do. And outside of Quinn Hughes, I just don't see anyone equipped to do that. Now, Jack Rathbone might take that step and might do some things in that regard, but, and Oliver Ekman-Larsson, if you can get him in the right minutes and keep him healthy and not weigh him down with certain matchups, might be able to give you a little bit of that as well. But that's my big concern. Who's going to get these guys the puck? And, with all due respect, none of these guys is Crosby and Malkin.
No, that is fair. That is absolutely fair. The Crosby and Malkin, if they are Crosby and Malkin, they haven't revealed that yet, and they have a ways to go. Farhan, thanks for this, buddy. Appreciate it. Okay. We'll
My pleasure. Enjoy the weekend.
Have yourself a great weekend. And we'll catch up here. Just want to shout out our title sponsor here, Audi Downtown Vancouver. You can find them at the corner of Burrard and 2nd. The new all-electric Q4 is there in the showroom, so check it on out. Jeff, couple of comments here that are coming in from our listeners that I wanted to get to. Sam says we weren't good enough last year. Now we have to get rid of more players to make this work. Yikes! Double exclamation point. There's this one from Blair who says, under market value for a guy like JT, but better suited for a team with a window of the next 3 or 4 years. I think it can turn ugly. So exactly as you put it. And then there's Sports Faucet who says, Francesco Aquilini type of move. It's clearly ownership run now. All the new people instill the same old philosophy. It's obvious now that ownership is the problem. Pick up on any of those 3.
Yeah, look, they've come through a summer where one of their closest competitors, the Calgary Flames, had a 115-point player and really the face of the franchise play his way out of town, just walk away. And I don't think the Canucks wanted any part of that. So there's some certainty here. There's cost certainty at the very least. Again, we know the perils and the red flags here. I do think, though, that any day that you re-sign and your best player commits to the organization and to the city, you have to view it on some level as a good news story. You do. There are going to be ramifications. Sure there are. But rather than this guy walking away as an unrestricted free agent, now, that wasn't the only option, obviously, a trade, but it's pretty clear from this move today that they just weren't happy with or interested in the offers that had been made. And we don't know. I mean, there's speculation out there. I had it suggested to me last week that one with the Rangers of Hedl and Lundqvist and a first was never truly tabled in that fashion, although it has been reported that was the case. So who knows where the truth lies, but this much we know now. JT Miller, a Vancouver Canucks, for the short term, but the long term as well. And again, it feels to me like they're in the starting blocks and on this race to become a contender. And I think for those that aren't thrilled with the deal, Matt, and maybe it comes back to what you just said about ownership, but the previous regime squandered money, terrible contracts, handcuffed themselves, handcuffed this new group. And then the new group comes in and talks about priority 1 being to carve out cap flexibility. And I do think that there's a large segment of the fan base that wanted to see that day. And then from that point, what would they do with the flexibility? What would that look like? How would they attack the needs of the hockey club? And in some ways, this just kind of feels like a continuation of what this fan base has been served up here in the last little while, and that is just continue to spend, and not ever get to that point where you can pounce and take advantage of some market inefficiencies and teams that are in trouble. And there are going to be teams in trouble here in the next couple of weeks, and the Canucks are one of them. And instead of being able to pounce, and now there's a bit of a flawed strategy there, because they thought they were doing that with Dallas in the expansion draft, and they felt pretty good about getting Jason Dickinson for a third-round pick. And now I'm wondering, would people be okay with them peddling a second rounder to get out from under the final 2 years of that contract? So they've said that that's something they're interested in. Let's see now if that tune changes in any way here, because I do feel that there are a few shoes that are going to have to drop. That's just the simple reality of the economics of today's National Hockey League.
For those who aren't already following Sekeres and Price and subscribing to the podcast, we invite you to do so wherever you get your podcast, whatever platform your preference. We have Blake Price back here. So, Blake, we're going to get some final thoughts from you on this huge JT Miller extension. 7 years, $56 million, $8 million per year with a full no trade clause in the first 4 years. Blake?
Yeah, guys. I think one thing that we need to point out, and it's not a problem. I mean, it's sort of a good problem to have if it comes to fruition here. But if Andrei Kuzmenko on his ELC year here outperforms a guy like Brock Besser, certainly a guy like Connor Garland, but the more intriguing one to me is Connor Garland, or is Brock Besser, pardon me. What if Kuzmenko is amongst the best, if not the best winger on this team? That will now create a problem, right? Because they'll want to re-sign that player, and they're going to need room to do that. And so an interesting storyline to follow all season long, because they can make this work this year, but next year's the concern. If Kuzmenko is good, the Canucks have got some issues on their hands and some tiles to move around here on this playing surface.
Jeff, reply on that.
Yeah, and it does fall in the good category, because you want Kuzmenko to have success right away in the National Hockey League, but it's going to come at a price. So that's where we said there's just simply not enough to go around, and we'll see what happens. Lots of question marks around him, but lots of excitement, and rightly so. He picked the Vancouver Canucks. He could elsewhere. He saw opportunity here, and let's see what he makes of it. But you do wonder, and if he does live up to expectations and were to finish with more goals than the other wingers that Blake talked about, then what? We've just come through a lot of speculation about Brock Besser and his future here, but he committed for 3 more years. Team committed to him. And so, again, I think he's going to be put in a position to succeed. Kuzmenko not likely to get the same power play looks and opportunities that Besser is going to have. Connor Garland scored almost, it was almost non-existent on the power play, all his production of 5-on-5. So we'll sort of see what the balance of his scoring looks like this time around. But yeah, I mean, that's one they'll cross, a bridge they'll cross when they get to it. But that surmises that Kuzmenko is going to have the kind of success that he and the hockey club hope. And if that's the case, then yes, he's going to get paid. And that's just the reality of this situation.
I want to shout out another one of our sponsors, Altieri Insurance. If you're looking for a trustworthy, available, local company to have your back in the insurance game, check out Altieri. They're the insurance people. That's ALTERI.ca, Altieri Insurance. Well, gentlemen, I think it was always in the back of my mind this summer that we may get called away from whatever we're doing to stick handle a JT Miller extension or trade. It turned out to be late Friday afternoon, September 2nd, heading into the Labor Day long weekend. Jeff, thank you so much for being available after sitting in as host today on the podcast. And Blake, huge thank you for joining us from vacation over there on the island. Appreciate this, gentlemen.
Thank you, guys. Good stuff.